G'day everyone, I'm your host Stephen, and welcome to another episode of the Bamboo History Podcast. For those of you who are new, the Bamboo History Podcast is a podcast about Chinese and East Asian history. If you like this sort of content, please subscribe to my podcast to keep track of my latest episodes and listen to my existing content. I also have an Instagram too, at Bamboo History Podcast, which contains visual content, teasers, and additional historical content too small to fit into a podcast. So please check out and follow my Instagram too. And lastly, to all my existing listeners, thanks again for being with me on this journey and for all of your support. Now, I'm really excited for today's episode because today, and for the first time ever on this show, I'm doing an interview. Today, I'll be interviewing Angela Lin, who is currently a copywriter from Singapore and studied an honours degree in history at the National University of Singapore. She is passionate about history, as well as Singaporean modern societal issues, as well as Asian culture, films, and so I've read, she also likes pottery as well. The focus of today's interview will be an article that Angela recently wrote about, titled Empress Dowager Cixi, Rightly Condemned or Wrongly Discredited, which she wrote for the media platform The Collector. For those of you who don't know what that is, The Collector is an online media platform that aims to promote the knowledge and passion of humanities to the public and aims to bring scholars, enthusiasts, or just someone with a curious mind all together. The Collector is filled with great articles written by authors who are qualified in the fields of art, philosophy, and of course, history. If you want to know more about The Collector, what they do, and what they have online, head on to their website at thecollector.com. That's spelt TheColllector, The Collector. No caps, no spaces. All right, now let's get straight into this episode. So Angela has now joined us from Singapore. G'day, Angela. How are you?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Stephen. I'm good, and I'm so excited to be on your podcast. Excited to start this fruitful conversation with you.
We're really excited for you to come onto our podcast as well. To begin, would you be able to introduce to all our listeners who you are, what you do, and what you enjoy?
Okay, I'm Angela. You can call me Angela. I actually majored in history back in university, and then I sort of continued this passion until now, a few years down the road already. I'm actually a content writer, a copywriter for local gallery. So I mainly deal with, you mentioned earlier, contemporary as well as historical Singapore topics. Yeah.
And why did you decide to start writing articles for The Collector?
I've actually been reading The Collector for a while and just looking at the kind of the variety of articles they have. They are actually reaching out to a lot of writers from all over the world, which is something that I find very interesting. There is this online platform where people who are enthusiastic about history, about this kind of topics, they actually can come together, share their expertise, share their views, and also to connect with like-minded individuals from all over the world. So that is something that I find very intriguing. And I'm also a little curious about the kind of angle that I can portray from an Asian perspective, because this is mainly a site that's actually based in Canada. So it's more from a Western point of view. So I'm actually interested and also excited to share a little bit more about Asian history as well as Singaporean history if I get a chance, okay? But mostly Asian history, something that I'm more passionate about, and hopefully I can share my perspectives, what I know, what I've learned with audiences from all over the world. Yeah.
And I guess leading into the article that you've written about the Empress Dowager Cixi, what intrigued you about Cixi in particular that you decided to write about her rather than other personalities in ancient/modern Chinese history?
I think she's a really enigmatic character. She's so complex. Like the way she faces the challenges during her time as a woman in imperial China. I think that's not an easy thing for a woman like her. She came from very humble beginnings. She rose, you can say, through the ranks all the way up to become the highest authority in China. I think that's not an easy task. And in fact, she did it within 50 years. I think that is something that she's not really given a lot of credit for. And what I'm interested most about her is how even after, almost a century after she has passed, she still manages to divide opinions. she still manages to get people angry. Like,
Yeah.
if you talk to people about the end of Imperial China, they'll be like, oh, it's Cici's fault. That woman,
Yeah.
that crazy woman who she ended the whole sort of empire, is all her fault. So I think the fact that she can trigger this kind of emotions in the modern audience is really something that I find very fascinating. Yeah.
From your perspective, how did you feel about Empress Dowager Cixi growing up? And did people around you share sort of the sentiment of hate towards her, or what sort of feeling was there towards her?
I think when I was learning about her, I believe back in university days, the way it was taught is actually in a more mainstream, aligned the mainstream interpretations. Like
Yeah.
most people, you perceive her as power hungry. She's the despot. She's the person who, decorated her whole palace beautifully, using all the state reserves and the state funds. And then she caused the downfall of Qing Empire. So that was like the whole traditional perspective that we grew up with and we were very accustomed to. I think this is also something that has been reinforced by the media, like the whole media, the movies that we see about her or the films that we watched about her is always portrayed in this kind of negative light. So actually growing up, my dad's, he's also quite interested in historical topics. We actually talked about some of these things when we were chatting and all. So
Oh, that's really
whenever
good.
we talk about Chinese history, we always saw her as corrupted, like she's manipulative,
Yeah.
especially the part where she ruled behind the curtain, that the
Yeah.
whole, in Chinese called it 推帘听政,
Yeah.
like that whole idea that she can manipulate people, but she sort of like hide behind the curtains, and then she's going with all her little schemes and all those things to bring people down, to bring her opponents down. I think this is actually something very relevant in the modern, if you apply this to politics in the corporate world. This is actually a kind of like a strategy that some people use also. I think this is what cements her relevance, like the whole political
Yeah.
strategies that she used. Yeah.
And I agree. I think, and one of the things I love about history is that you can learn from the past and apply it into the present. So in terms of the
Absolutely. Yeah.
tactics that she used to gain power and all that, it's perfectly relevant to the world of politics and business today. So I
Exactly.
guess in terms of during your research and understanding of Empress Cixi, what did you think were the qualities that she had, or what personality did you have, or the upbringing that she had growing up, did you think enabled her to do all of that, to gain power in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, so I read a bit about her life before she became the concubine, before like she joined the palace. I knew that she was actually from an educated family, but I didn't know that in her upbringing, her father actually engaged her in conversations about like basically state affairs, basically business, basically everything related to politics. So I think that kind of environment that she grew up with actually trained her confidence in a sense. It allowed her to be more vocal about how she felt, and she's also more knowledgeable as well as aware of the things that's going on around her. And I think when she joined the Empress harem and she entered the palace, she did try to apply this experience. She did try to, give like unsolicited opinions to the emperor, which I later read that he was very annoyed by it, and he's totally like, oh,
Yeah.
this woman needs to stop telling me what to do. Yeah, so I think for Cixi, she's shaped by a lot of her growing up experiences, and also the fact that she learned how to read and write Chinese, which is
Yeah.
actually a little uncommon for people, for women of that time. And she, if I'm not wrong, she's also trained in terms of like drawing, playing chess, embroidery, those kind of like
Yeah.
desirable qualities of a woman for that point in time. So that actually all these growing up experiences actually paved the way for her to enter the palace to become a concubine. Yeah, which she actually
Yeah.
used to her advantage. Yeah.
And I think going on to that point, how she was, her father was was in politics, and she grew up, educated in the Chinese language and had a wealth of knowledge. That probably would have set her apart from her peers, like from the other concubines and all that in the palace. Do you think that was probably the case?
I think that definitely helped her candidature. That's definitely one of the reasons why I think she got selected.
Yeah.
But I read from my research that she is actually not like fantastically beautiful. She's not like breathtakingly beautiful, like for a woman at that point in time. But I think she had poise,
Yeah.
which is something that the emperor actually saw in her, and the fact that she's very observant and she could pick up little things from the
Yeah.
people around her, and she would try to apply them in their life. And if it doesn't work, for example, like how the emperor doesn't really like her
Yeah.
opinions and all those things, she will learn the lesson and then she will stop it. And I think
Oh,
that is
okay.
something that is, she's very adaptable in the sense she's willing to take risks, make a mistake,
Yeah.
learn from it, and then I'll just observe and watch from now on. I think that is something which makes her a very compelling character. Yeah.
Yeah. And how long did it take
Yeah.
for her to rise up the ranks?
I believe all it took was for her to give birth to a son.
Oh, okay.
She gave birth to the emperor's son, and then that sort of like elevated her through the ranks. Yeah, which is
Yeah.
actually the emperor Tongzhi in the future. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. I
okay.
believe
Yeah.
she became the Empress concubine in 1851, and
Yeah.
then she gave birth in 1856, which is like 5 years.
Yeah, so it's not that long. And yeah, because of the fact that, the males is very important for the succession and all that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you think when I was reading your article, you listed a lot of her achievements, but there were also some things that probably weren't as good that she did. Writing the article, what did you think was one of her greatest achievements and what was one of her worst failures?
In terms of the achievements, I think in my article, I talked about how she launched the self-strengthening movement, which is the whole start of the modernization aspect of China, which is happened at a very pivotal moment in Chinese history because they were dealing with the Taiping Rebellion, the whole Western incursions from the Opium War and all those things. That was a point where she realized that there was a need to modernize China. There was a need to compete with all these foreign powers in terms of defense, in terms of military, in terms of the whole intellectual movement. In a sense, we need to keep up. We need to accept the fact that we are behind. And we need to accept the fact that these people, if we don't do something about it, they will come into our country and take over everything we have. I think that realization that she had actually helped her push for the self-strengthening movement, which really did amount to some change and some not profound changes. I wouldn't say it's profound changes, but there was some change. And there was the fact that people still believe, okay, maybe China can make it. Maybe we are not so bad after all. I think she helped to spark that confidence. I think she helped to create that whole drive for modernization. Her willingness to see the Western powers as not just barbarians, not just people who are barbarian, they're just here to take our nation. I think she did try to improve the diplomacy aspect with the Western powers. There is the creation of the whole sort of like a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Zhongli Yamen. There's something that she's willing to learn from the foreign powers, not just treat them as enemies and it's just us versus them. I think that is something that she managed to achieve within that short period of time. But for me personally, that's the more objective part. For the subjective aspect, personally, I feel that her greatest achievements really lie in how she laid a lot of foundations for a lot of change after she died. For example, she actually pushed for the abolishment of foot binding. If you know, a very grotesque, really disgusting tradition of the past. She helped to actually pave the way for the the abolishment of, if I'm not wrong, the imperial Chinese examinations, the ancient examination system. All these are things that she pushed for during her lifetime, but the effects were only seen after that. People didn't realize her or didn't give her enough credit for these kind of things. Only after she passed, maybe like 20 years, 30 years down the road, then we start to realize that this woman, apart from the whole corrupted part, she actually did something and her legacy actually lasted longer than just that 50 years where she's in power. And I think that's one of the greatest achievements, I would say, of Cixi. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's just unlucky in a way that she's been made into a scapegoat for all of the failures that have happened just because she was the decision maker, she was the figurehead. But I think it represents a lot more in terms of the Chinese culture in general coming into conflict with the modernization of the West. One thing I did want to touch upon was what you mentioned about the self-strengthening movement. So you did mention that, yeah, she made very proactive steps to reform China during that period. But I did notice in your article that you mentioned that she was really resistant when it came up to the 100 Days reform that happened later on under Guangxu. So I was just curious what you thought, I guess, was the reason as to why she was so resistant to that when she was very proactive earlier on.
Right. I think we have to examine what happened in this period of time because the self-strengthening movement was back in 1861. And then Guangxi's reform was actually in, I believe, 1898 when he came to power after he matured. That is actually looking at about 30 years. I think that's 30 years, which is actually half of her reign, if you look at it. There were a lot of things that happened during that period of time. She was dealing with a lot of internal politics. For example, like she and Prince Gong, her sort of a partner in crime, the sidekick that helped her launch the self-strengthening movement, they were getting into a lot of conflicts. She didn't like him. She saw him as a threat, basically, like this guy is just getting so much power. He is wielding a lot of influence in the Zhongli Yamen. He ended the Taiping Rebellion. I think he's gonna come after my ranks and my authority one day. So I need to get rid of him. So she was very engrossed in that whole paranoia about this Prince Gong, right? That actually affected how the relationship that they have, which is she's actually the half brother of the previous emperor. So the relationship that they had actually suffered after that. And then she was dealing with also the next Emperor Tongzhi's death in 1875. Her trusted senior consort, which is Empress Cian, the other consort of Emperor Xianfeng. So her sudden death actually changed the way she saw things because Empress Cian was very supportive of her, very supportive of the way from the start, where she was just a lower ranking concubine, she supported her, helped her rise through the ranks. She actually ruled behind the curtain with her as well. When Ci died, a lot of things caused Cixi to be more withdrawn. She took a step back to reevaluate the whole situation, in the face of Western incursions. What am I supposed to do with this ailing empire? What's the next step I should take? And then while I'm trying to modernize this country, I'm trying to improve things, make things work, and then all these foreign powers start to make my life difficult. This Japanese empire that's starting to get so strong, threatening me in terms of the naval power. And then obviously we all know that led to the first Sino-Japanese War. That was a crushing, a humiliating defeat for China, and then that basically just released the whole floodgates for like the Western powers to come in and basically scramble for concessions in China. So basically they're cutting us up. I don't think as Cixi, I can remain so open-minded and so receptive to reforms anymore. So all these threats internally as well as externally, all these changes in the palace as well as outside of the palace, I think pushed her to be just like, okay, I think I had enough. I'm going to build walls now. I'm going to just not be so open-minded to modernization anymore. All these people are trying to basically bring my empire down. So I think that created that sort of paranoia in her, the whole suspicions of like everybody, not just the foreign powers, but also the pro-West reformists inside the palace. So that created that boundary, that whole walls that she started to build up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it comes down, as you said, to the whole world coming down onto her, and it's almost like a conflict inside her own mind as well. And going on to your point of the first Sino-Japanese War, I have read somewhere that one of the reasons why they lost was because the ships weren't maintained properly because she spent a lot of money maintaining the palace. So I guess drawing onto
Absolutely.
that and her own personal projects, what do you
Right.
think about that?
I think her personal corruption definitely is clear as day. Everybody knows it. Like you see
Yeah,
how opulent her inner palaces were, and how obsessed and vain she is as a person. Like she always have the best clothing. She has to have a feast every single meal. I think all these actually
yeah.
contributed to. These are definitely factors that end the empire, but I won't say it's the main factor. Like you asked me earlier, what's the greatest failure? I feel really is her disastrous policy U-turn. Like she didn't stick to what she set out to do. Like when you want to modernize, you can't just stop halfway, because that's just not how things work. Like I don't think she stopped halfway. She sort of reversed the whole thing. Like she was very open-minded towards westernization and Western foreign powers. She saw the merits of modernization, and then because she couldn't overcome her paranoia, in my opinion, she couldn't deal with a lot of the internal as well as external changes. She sort of just took a very big U-turn. It's just like 180 degrees change. Like, I'm not going to do this anymore. So a lot of historians actually saw this U-turn in terms of her failure to accept to join the 100 Days reform is basically ending the last chance that China had. If she had been more open-minded, if she had worked with Guangxi at that point in time, it might potentially have saved the empire. That's what a lot of historians believe at that point in time. Yeah. So what I
Yep.
feel is the greatest failure is really the policy U-turn, rather not so much of the corruption part. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably where a lot of, I guess, the hate for her stems from as well.
Yeah. It's like the country is dying, but you're spending so much money on your inner palace, on your lifestyle,
Yeah,
and you're not being very shy about it. Yeah. So I think that helped to cement her whole reputation as a really this corrupted woman who only cares about herself. I read somewhere that I believe is Mao Zedong's wife, I believe Jiang Qing, when she was
yeah,
arrested in the 70s. It was also revealed that she had a very opulent lifestyle. I
yeah.
think that didn't help the whole Chinese women leader kind of perspective. Like we all just see them as like they're just corrupted. They just make
Yeah.
use of state funds to fund their own materialistic lifestyle, and that made Cixi worse in terms of public conception as well. Yeah.
And that actually, now that you mention it, I think it's very sort of interesting to note that she could possibly have also been vilified because she was a female, right? A female figurehead. And China has mainly
Definitely.
been patriarchal. From a female's perspective, what should us in general as a whole, can we learn from Sushi's experiences? And what does that say about, women in leadership positions, and all that?
I think it's like I mentioned earlier, it's definitely tough for women to not just to rise through the ranks. I think
Yeah,
that's really very difficult at that point in time where you're dealing with a lot of other concubines. But the fact that she managed to stand at the highest authority, I think that is something that, like I mentioned earlier, we didn't really give her enough credit for. It requires, I think, more than just intelligence, more than just observational skills, more than just playing the whole political game. I think it's the fact that she managed to convince everyone that she's on equal standing as males, as like even the empress. Even after she sort of retired towards the later part of the years, a lot of the state officials were actually going to her instead of the emperor for advice. I think there is something that she has achieved throughout this whole sea of male officials, male leaders. I managed to make them feel that my opinions matter. I know better than the emperor. I think that is something that we should give her some credit for at that point in time. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of this patriarchy. There's a lot of this whole male-centric, male-dominated perspectives in history. I hope that through my article, we can try to shed more light on some of the contributions that female leaders have made also. It's unfortunate that my example is Cixi because, she's such a divisive and controversial character. But I hope that we can see beyond the gender and to really objectively evaluate her contributions and think in terms of the fact that she was a woman who is just basically against the world at that point in time. The world is against her, she's against the world, and how difficult it must have been. Yeah.
No, that's very insightful. And I think going on that, when you wrote your article, what do you hope to achieve with the article you've written, and how do you think her perception would change, and will it ever change?
Personally, growing up and going through my undergraduate career and all those things, I've never really believed in that whole, this great man theory. Like, this person is the hero of this country. He founded this place. It's all about him. I've never believed in that. Controversial as it might sound, I personally believe that the Hitler and Gandhi, there's a Gandhi in Hitler, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like there's no political figure that is like 100% sane or 100% villain, right? Even Hitler had contributions, right? Even Gandhi might have his dark side. So I feel that it's wrong that we treat a certain historical figure as just he or she screwed up and he or she will always be screwed up. I think that when history vilifies a certain historical figure in this way, it is sort of create that whole boundary, create that whole barrier between people who want to learn about history. Sometimes we feel like, oh, that person is just like that. Maybe he's really like that. And you are not so interested to learn more. For a general audience, it could be like that. And you'll just be vilified forever. I think that's not fair. And I think for people who study history, the role of history is really to facilitate this ongoing, it's sort of a never-ending discussion and conversation between the past and the present. We shouldn't take what we have learned in the past as just this person is just a villain for the rest of the time. Okay, it shouldn't be like this. All these narratives and all these perspectives will and should go through generations and generations of interpretation and even reinterpretations. Everything we know today might just be, disputed in the near future. I think that's the beauty of history to me, that we never stop questioning the good, the bad, the ugly, things that are controversial, things that make people uncomfortable. I think that's the role that history plays. And through my article, I really hope that we can see things from a different perspective now, take a step back and just reevaluate what we have learned, and also balance it with the emerging perspectives and emerging narratives, especially a lot of the revisionist arguments that are actually coming out, surfacing in the modern times, that we paint a more balanced picture. I think balance is the key word over here, a more balanced picture of Cixi's merits as well as her demerits. And then we try to see her in a more forgiving lens, right? To understand the circumstances that shaped her decisions, the sort of reluctance, the sort of unwillingness that she experienced, the sort of no choice situation she was in. I hope that we can move towards that part of the evaluation. Yeah.
And honestly, when I read your article, I could feel myself changing my own sentiments of Cixi as I was reading your article. And I think because of that, that's why I really enjoyed it. And so do you think, going on what you said, if people want to learn about a personality, an event, or something that occurred in the past, what do you think is the easiest way for someone to understand all of that without having been blinded by everything that's been fed to them already?
Reevaluate the sources we get our information from. A lot of the people who have learned about Cixi actually subscribe to the more Western historiography in a sense. So a lot of these perspectives that we have actually come from published books in the Western world. When I was doing my research, I learned about some books that are restudied in a sense. Actually, some of these sources were not even proven. Some of these sources were actually made up. This book called China by the Empress Dowager by actually Bland and Edmund Backhouse. I read later that this book that was once regarded as like a very good source about Cixi was actually made up of a lot of fabricated information. But by the time this was realized, it was actually too late. A lot of people have already formed opinions about Cixi and the whole perspective of her, painting her as despot, as a corrupted, evil Chinese woman. These impressions have already been entrenched. So if we don't ever question the sources that we get this information from, I think we will just leave with the fact that, oh, I'll take this person's word for it. I'll just take this so-called historical research for it. I think that's very wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. We should not just take sources for the even sources have their downsides. Even sources have their bias. So as a history student, when I studied history, what I was taught most was to question the source. You shouldn't take everything you read. Nowadays on the internet, it's so easy to get fake news, right? I think that's even worse in today's era. So with that understanding, it's more important to just take sources from the Western world as well as from the Asian perspective. So once you get these sources, you put all these sources in front of you, and you ask yourself, what do you really feel about it? I think that is the most important part about learning about history, that you form your own opinions, you have your own questions, and you get to the conclusion yourself. Yeah, and this conclusion might even change for 30 to 40 years down the road. And that is the whole ongoing conversation you should have with this.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's the most important thing. And who knows, maybe my opinion might change over 30 years from now as well, and maybe yours will too.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And I think because it's the most important thing to think about when reading history, it's also probably the most challenging part as well. But yeah, anyway, I think that brings us to an end to our discussion. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Joining the podcast. I really appreciate it. And yeah, to all of our listeners, that brings an end to another episode. So I hope all of you enjoyed today's episode and interview. A reminder for all of you to subscribe to my podcast and follow my Instagram if you enjoy this type of content. If you want to contact me, you can slide into my DMs on Insta, or you can email me. Details will be in the description box below. So once again, I'd like to thank Angela for joining us today and for agreeing to be interviewed. And I'd also like to thank The Collector for helping me to arrange this interview and to speak with Angela. And also another reminder to check out The Collector as well and the content that they have. And I'll also leave a link in my description box below too. So, okay, that's it, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and I'll see you all next time on the Bamboo History Podcast. Bye for now.